I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would walk away from me. Yet here I was, sitting on the stiff, uncomfortable chair of my small nursing home room, watching her fade into the hallway without so much as a backward glance. The sound of the door closing echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had, and the silence that followed felt deafening. A nurse, quietly rearranging the blankets, whispered, "She said she couldn't handle it anymore." I clutched the armrest as if it could anchor me, but my heart was already sinking. Why would she abandon me at the one place I needed her most? It wasn't always like this. I had raised her on sleepless nights, sacrificing my own dreams and comfort just to make sure she had every opportunity I never did. I remember every birthday, every scraped knee, every time she came running with tears and laughter intertwined. I was always there. She was my life, my pride, my constant. We were inseparable, or at least that's what I believed. But lately, something had been shifting. Missed calls, delayed visits, and a subtle coldness in her tone had begun creeping into our conversations. At first, I blamed myself, thinking maybe I was being too sensitive, too clingy. Yet deep down, a small, nagging voice whispered that something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just stress, work, or the chaos of life. But the cracks were widening, almost invisible, like hairline fractures in glass, until the moment they shattered completely. I remember the last week before she left. I had tried to engage her in small talk, asking about her day, telling her about the little things that had happened in my room, a bird nesting by the window, a new neighbor at the home. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile practiced in front of mirrors, polite but distant. Trust, once so effortless, now felt fragile, and I didn't realize then just how fragile it had become. Every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night felt like it had been erased in a single step down the hallway. And yet, even as my chest tightened and tears welled up, a small, desperate part of me clung to hope. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she would come back. Maybe I hadn't lost her completely. But as I sat there, alone, staring at the blank wall of my room, I couldn't shake the question that burned hotter than any heartbreak I had ever felt. Why would my own daughter abandon me? The next morning, I awoke to an emptiness I couldn't shake. The quiet of the room was unbearable, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. My daughter's side of the bed was empty, her belongings gone. And then I saw it, a small folded note left neatly on my pillow. My hands trembled as I picked it up, afraid yet compelled to read her words. "I can't do this anymore. I don't have the strength. I'm sorry." The paper felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Those words, so brief, so cold, cut deeper than any argument, any punishment, any disappointment I had endured in my life. My mind refused to accept it at first. She must have been joking. There had to be an explanation. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Each ring that didn't connect felt like another layer of betrayal. I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hands. I replayed every moment we had shared, searching for signs I had missed. The laughter, the hugs, the way she used to run to me when she was scared. All of it clashed violently with the reality in front of me. Could this be the same daughter I had raised? The one I had given everything for? The one I had loved without condition? And yet, here she was, abandoning me in a place I never wanted to be, a place I had tried to accept for her sake, only to feel utterly rejected. As the days passed, the emotional pressure began to mount. Friends and distant relatives started avoiding me, whispering behind closed doors as if my daughter's choice reflected some failing in me. Even the staff treated me differently, some with pity, others with awkward smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I started noticing little signs, an unanswered phone call here, a half-hearted greeting there. It felt as if the entire world was reminding me of her absence, pushing me further into isolation. Then came the subtle clues that something was more complicated than I initially imagined. Text messages from acquaintances hinted at financial tensions, resentments she had carried quietly, and stress I had never known existed. A friend casually mentioned, "She's been under a lot of pressure, you know. It's not just about the nursing home." At first, I resisted believing it. I wanted to think this was purely a betrayal, a cold-hearted abandonment. But doubt crept in, twisting with my grief and anger. I started noticing patterns in her behavior, small cracks that I had ignored before. Calls returned late, vague excuses for missed visits, forced smiles when she did show up. Each instance added another weight to my heart, making the betrayal feel heavier, more permanent. My mind oscillated constantly between denial and reality, hoping against hope that this was temporary, that she would come back and explain herself. The nursing home itself became a place of tension. Every time the door opened, I braced myself, half expecting her to walk in and half fearing that she never would. The loneliness gnawed at me, and the emotional pressure became unbearable. Each passing day, my thoughts spiraled. Had I done something wrong? Was she truly incapable of love, or had circumstances forced her hand? The questions piled on top of each other, unanswered, leaving me exhausted and hollow. And yet, amid the pain and confusion, a small, desperate part of me clung to the possibility that there was more to the story, that the truth was hidden somewhere, waiting to be uncovered. Something told me this betrayal wasn't the end of our story. There had to be a reason. There had to be a truth beneath the heartbreak, a thread I could follow to understand why my own daughter could walk away from me. Days turned into a blur of quiet despair. Every time I tried to reach out to her, I was met with impatience or silence. I called her again, my hands shaking, heart pounding, desperate for even a hint of understanding. When she finally answered, her voice was sharp, clipped, distant, a voice that I barely recognized as my daughter's. She said something that I can't forget. "You've had your time. Now it's my turn." Those words hit me like a hammer. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach twist, and the betrayal cut deeper than before. I wanted to scream, to demand why she could treat me this way, but the anger mingled with sorrow, leaving me paralyzed. I tried to reason with her, but every attempt seemed only to push her further away. Her voice carried a cold arrogance I had never heard before. The daughter I knew, the one who used to run to me crying from nightmares, now sounded like a stranger. My emotional breaking point was nearing, the line between heartbreak and rage becoming thinner with every call. Even the few friends I confided in seemed helpless. Their well-meaning advice only reminded me of the stark truth. I was alone in dealing with this. Every passing day, the silence in the nursing home felt heavier. Meals went untouched, the television murmured in the background, and I spent hours staring at the walls, replaying memories, conversations, and her abandoning steps. I felt trapped in a cage of my own emotions, powerless to stop the downward spiral. Then, unexpectedly, a glimmer of hope appeared. A neighbor, someone who had known our family long before the distance between my daughter and me grew, sent me a message late one evening. They had stumbled upon old emails and messages I had never seen, conversations filled with hidden stress, financial pressures, and feelings of being overwhelmed that my daughter had carried silently. For the first time since she left, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The documents revealed that she hadn't walked away out of cruelty or lack of love. She had been battling pressures I had no idea existed: debts, personal struggles, and the crushing guilt of feeling she could never do enough. All the coldness I had interpreted as abandonment was, in truth, fear and exhaustion, a desperation to find some reprieve from burdens she thought she had to face alone. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a shift within myself. The balance of power, the feeling of helplessness that had gripped me for weeks, began to ease. For the first time, I understood that confrontation wasn't just about anger or punishment, it was about uncovering the truth. I realized that if I approached her carefully, with patience and evidence, I could finally bridge the gap between us. I started to plan how I would face her, how I would finally uncover the full story. The fear and sadness were still there, but now they were mingled with determination. I knew that the next encounter could either break us completely or finally bring the truth into the light. The question burned in my mind, sharper than ever. Could this confrontation heal what had been shattered, or had too much already been lost? Even in that moment of despair, I clung to one thought. The truth was finally within reach, and with it, a chance for understanding, reconciliation, or at least the closure I desperately needed. The day I finally saw her again, my heart was a storm of fear, hope, and lingering pain. I had the documents in hand, every hidden message, every hint of the pressures she'd been carrying, and I was determined to get answers. I didn't know if this would end in forgiveness or final heartbreak, but I knew I had to face the truth. When she walked into the nursing home, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. She avoided my gaze at first, fidgeting with the strap of her bag, her shoulders tight with tension. For a moment, I saw her as a frightened child again, and a pang of both sorrow and love hit me. I held the papers tightly, my knuckles white. "I know why you left," I began, my voice trembling. "I have these. I know you've been under pressure, more than I realized. I need you to tell me everything." Her eyes filled with tears, the first genuine ones I had seen in weeks. She tried to speak, her voice catching, but the dam broke as the story spilled out. Debts she had quietly shouldered, guilt she carried for not being able to do more, exhaustion from work and life, all of it had overwhelmed her. She hadn't walked away because she didn't love me. She had left because she felt trapped, desperate, and incapable of being the daughter she thought I deserved. Hearing it, my chest ached in a new way, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and lingering anger. The betrayal I had felt wasn't the whole truth. The daughter I thought I had lost had been struggling in silence, and in her way, she had been trying to protect me from her own pain. I realized that the coldness, the absence, the harsh words had all been fear manifesting as distance. We talked for hours, the words flowing like a dam that had held for too long. Every explanation, every apology, every tear shared between us chipped away at the months of isolation and heartbreak. Friends and relatives who came to visit that day witnessed a rare and emotional scene. Two people broken and battered by misunderstanding, finally confronting the truth. Some wept silently, others could only stare at the raw honesty laid bare. In the end, there was no magical undoing of the past. The nursing home remained the same, the days passed slowly, and the lingering hurt didn't vanish instantly. But something shifted. We both understood each other in ways we hadn't before. There was recognition, empathy, and a fragile rebuilding of trust. I felt a sense of justice, not in punishment, but in the uncovering of truth.
She promised to visit regularly, to involve me in her life in ways she hadn't before, and to communicate honestly instead of retreating. I, in turn, promised patience, understanding, and forgiveness. Not the easy kind, but the kind that comes from knowing the full story, from surviving betrayal, and from confronting pain without turning away. As I sat alone later that evening, looking out the small window of my room, I felt a weight lift, though not completely. There was still sorrow, but there was also hope, understanding, and a rekindled bond. Life hadn't been easy, and it never would be, but for the first time in months, I felt peace. If you've ever felt abandoned, misunderstood, or betrayed by someone you love, remember this. Sometimes the truth is hidden behind layers of fear, guilt, or pressure. Confront it, uncover it, and you may find more than heartbreak. You may find understanding, and maybe even the chance to rebuild what you thought was lost.
Share your story in the comments, subscribe, and let others know they're not alone in facing pain, betrayal, and the long road toward healing. Even after she had confessed and we had shared that long, raw conversation, the days that followed were not easy. Visiting hours became our time to rebuild, and each meeting was a mixture of joy, awkwardness, and silent questions. I noticed small things I had never paid attention to before. The way her hand shook slightly when she poured tea, the tired lines under her eyes, the hesitation before she spoke about her struggles. These details reminded me that she had been carrying burdens alone, and my anger began to soften into understanding. But understanding didn't erase the hurt. There were nights I lay awake, remembering how lonely the nursing home had felt, how hollow the meals were, how the walls had seemed to close in on me while she was gone. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single moment, it was a process. Each conversation, each smile, each small gesture of her presence was a brick in rebuilding what had been broken, and each brick was heavy with the memory of betrayal, yet necessary to heal. Family and friends began to notice the change. Relatives who had been distant started visiting more often, and old friends reached out asking if I was all right. Some offered advice, some offered comfort, but most offered presence, and I realized that presence was worth more than any words. Slowly, the nursing home, once a symbol of abandonment, became a place of connection. The hallways that had once echoed with loneliness now occasionally carried laughter, conversations, and shared memories. I also began reflecting on myself. Did I unknowingly pressure her? Did I expect too much? I faced uncomfortable truths about my own fears, my own assumptions, and the ways I might have contributed to her stress. Accepting these truths wasn't easy, but it was liberating. Understanding my own flaws helped me approach her with patience, empathy, and a willingness to rebuild without judgment. One afternoon, she brought an old photo album. We sat together, flipping through pages filled with birthdays, school recitals, vacations, and everyday moments I had long treasured. We laughed at silly hairstyles, cried over forgotten memories, and slowly, quietly, began to stitch together the emotional distance that had grown between us. It was fragile, delicate, but it existed. Yet, even as healing began, there was a lingering weight. I knew our relationship would never be exactly the same. There would always be scars, reminders of the fear, the guilt, and the abandonment. But those scars didn't have to define us. They could be the foundation for something stronger, built on honesty, vulnerability, and the recognition that love is tested in ways we cannot always anticipate. Looking back, I realized the lesson was not about resentment or blame. It was about survival, understanding, and resilience. Pain can isolate, betrayal can fracture, but confronting the truth, however painful, can also bring clarity and the possibility of reconciliation. Life had thrown me into the depths of loneliness,
but it had also given me the chance to see my daughter not just as someone who left me, but as a human being carrying her own struggles, flawed, frightened, and ultimately seeking connection just as I was. If you've ever felt abandoned, misunderstood, or hurt by someone you love, remember this. The truth often lies beneath the surface. Look deeper, listen carefully, and approach with courage. Healing isn't instant, but it is possible. And sometimes what feels like the end is really the beginning of understanding, forgiveness, and fragile, precious reconciliation. Share your experiences, comment, and subscribe, because none of us are truly alone in navigating heartbreak, betrayal, and the journey toward emotional closure. Weeks turned into months, and the nursing home, once a place of isolation and despair, became a space where small moments mattered more than ever. I learned to treasure the quiet mornings when she would bring coffee, the shared laughter over simple memories, the comfortable silences that no longer felt empty. These weren't grand gestures, but they were real, and they reminded me that even fractured relationships could slowly heal when both people were willing to try. I also began noticing how my own perspective had changed. I realized that holding on to anger would have only trapped me further in pain. By seeking understanding instead of revenge, by listening instead of judging, I had discovered a power I didn't know I possessed. Pain, I learned, could be transformed into clarity, compassion, and ultimately resilience. The betrayal that had once felt like a gaping wound became a lesson etched deep into my heart, one I would carry for the rest of my life. Family visits became more frequent, friends came more often, and even the staff at the nursing home seemed to notice the shift. I could feel a small but growing sense of community forming around me again, something I hadn't felt in months. And yet, I remained aware that healing isn't a straight path. There were days when memories of abandonment would resurface like shadows, reminding me that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But those shadows no longer held the same power over me. I had learned to confront them, to acknowledge them, and to move forward without letting them define me. My daughter and I found a new rhythm. We began creating small traditions, moments that belonged to us alone. Weekly walks in the garden, photo albums we updated together, short phone calls just to check in. These routines became anchors in a life that had once felt adrift. And through these acts, I discovered something profound. Love isn't always loud, dramatic, or perfect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's small gestures, shared tears, and the willingness to show up even when it's difficult. Looking back on the months of fear, betrayal, and heartbreak, I realized that the journey had changed me. I was no longer the same person who had sat alone in that cold, silent room, feeling abandoned. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, not just toward her, but toward myself. I had learned to hold pain and forgiveness in the same hand, to recognize human flaws without losing my dignity, and to find peace, even when the past could not be erased. If there's one message I want anyone watching to take away, it's this: the truth matters. The effort to understand matters, and the courage to confront pain can transform even the deepest wounds. Betrayal may break you, but it doesn't have to define you. Healing may be slow, but it is possible, and love, even after abandonment, can still find its way back. So, if you've ever felt abandoned, hurt, or betrayed, hold on to the hope that understanding can come. Share your story. Comment below, subscribe, and let others know they are not alone. Sometimes the hardest journeys bring the most profound lessons, and sometimes, after all the darkness, you find a light you thought was gone forever. Even now, months later, I find myself reflecting on how fragile relationships can be, even between the closest people. The bond between a parent and child is supposed to be unshakable, yet I had learned the hard way that life,
pressure, and misunderstandings can strain even the strongest love. Sitting in my room watching her laugh softly at something trivial, I realized how much we had both changed. She was no longer the frightened, overwhelmed young woman who had left me, and I was no longer the anxious, abandoned mother trapped in despair. We had both grown through pain. I think often about what could have gone differently. Could I have noticed the signs sooner? Could I have asked different questions, offered more support without judgment? These thoughts linger, but I try not to let them weigh me down. Instead, I focus on what we built after the storm, a relationship rebuilt on honesty, transparency, and cautious, deliberate trust. Each small step forward became a victory. Every shared story, every glance, every gesture of care reminded me that healing is possible, even after heartbreak. I also noticed how much I had learned about myself through this ordeal. I realized that love is not just about giving, it's about understanding, letting go of expectations, and holding space for the struggles of others. I had been so focused on my own hurt that I initially failed to see the pressure and fear my daughter had been carrying. Confronting that truth changed everything. It allowed me to forgive, to empathize, and to rebuild a connection stronger than I had imagined. Outside the walls of the nursing home, life continued, but the lessons stayed with me. I approached old friendships with renewed patience, learned to listen more and judge less, and became more aware of the quiet struggles people carry beneath the surface. This journey had forced me to grow, not just as a mother, but as a human being. I understood now that betrayal is not always malicious, and sometimes absence is born of fear rather than indifference. Our relationship now has new rituals. We share small moments that once would have seemed trivial, a phone call to share a funny memory, a walk in the garden to watch the sunset, a cup of tea quietly enjoyed together. These moments may seem ordinary, but to me, they are extraordinary because they are proof that even deep wounds can mend. They remind me that love doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it is simply showing up, day after day, in small ways. And yet, the memories of the past are still there, lingering like shadows. Some days, the sting of abandonment still visits, a quiet reminder of what happened. But now those shadows no longer control me. I have learned to carry both the pain and the hope together, to honor the past without letting it define the present. And in that delicate balance, I found my peace. If you're watching this and have experienced betrayal, abandonment, or heartbreak, remember this. Understanding, empathy, and confronting the truth are powerful tools. Healing isn't linear and scars don't disappear, but they can coexist with love, forgiveness, and renewed connection. You are not alone in feeling lost or betrayed. Reach out, share your story, and hold on to the hope that relationships, even the most fragile, can find their way back. Subscribe, comment, and share this story if it resonates with you. Sometimes the deepest pain teaches the most important lessons, and sometimes, even after being left behind, the bond you thought was broken can become stronger than ever. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of pain, though it never erases the memory. Even now, when I sit in my room at the nursing home, I sometimes catch myself staring out the window, thinking of the weeks I spent alone, wondering why my own daughter had left me. But those days no longer feel like an ending. They feel like the painful beginning of a journey toward understanding, forgiveness, and reconnection. We have rebuilt our relationship, but differently than before. It is no longer taken for granted. Every visit, every smile, every shared moment is earned, cherished, and fragile in its own way. I've learned to appreciate the quiet gestures, a hand on mine, a cup of tea brought without being asked, a story shared over the garden wall. These moments, small as they may seem, carry a weight I never understood until I experienced their absence. The betrayal I felt still leaves a shadow, a lingering reminder that even love can falter under pressure. But I have also discovered that the truth, when uncovered, can heal more than anger ever could. My daughter's struggles, her fear, her guilt, all of it painted a picture I could never have imagined without seeing the hidden layers. Understanding her pain transformed my heartbreak into empathy, my anger into patience,
and my loneliness into a renewed connection. I realize now that life doesn't offer perfect resolutions. People leave, misunderstandings happen, and sometimes those we love most may disappoint us. But it also offers opportunities to rebuild, to grow, and to find clarity in the chaos. I have chosen to focus on the lessons this experience gave me, the importance of communication, the power of empathy, and the resilience of love even after it has been tested to its limits. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away, it's this. Betrayal does not define you. Abandonment does not have to end a relationship. Pain can coexist with hope. Healing is not instant, but it is possible. And love, even when strained or broken, can find its way back when truth and understanding guide the way. I look at my daughter now, and I see someone I love deeply, someone who is flawed and human, but also someone I respect and understand in a way I never did before. The journey was painful, but it taught me the value of patience, the strength of vulnerability, and the beauty of reconnecting after loss. Share your story in the comments. Subscribe and let others know that even after betrayal, even after abandonment, there is hope for understanding, forgiveness, and a chance to rebuild what once seemed lost. Life may be imperfect, but love, if nurtured carefully, can endure anything.